Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Dr. Philip Phillips and I'm the Associate Dean of the University Honors College. I'm pleased to have all of you here today, all of the students who are in the class and visitors we have from around campus. Always pleased to have in our midst our two deans, John Weil, Dean of the Honors College, and Bud Fisher, Dean of the College of Basic and Applied Sciences. As you know, our lecture series this semester is devoted to climate change. And today we are very pleased to have as our speaker Dr. Alisa Haas, who is Assistant Professor of Geography in the Department of Geosciences here at MTSU. She earned her PhD from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville in 2019, and she's published a number of articles in journals such as Atmosphere, the International Journal of Biometeorology, the Journal of Chemical Education, and International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. Her teaching and research focuses on climatology, biometeorology, applied climatology, heat waves, and climate change. Her topic today is the who, what, when, where, and why of heat exposure in a warmer world. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Haas.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Anytime I can talk about heat, I get really excited. So I'm going to talk a little bit to start with about globally what's going on with heat. How warm is it getting globally? Then move down to the more local level, United States, down to community level, and then down to an individual level. So let's start with, are we getting warmer? This is the question, are we getting warmer? There's a lot of debate going on. The answer is yes, we're getting warmer. So this is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, very recent, January 16th, 2020, and it's showing you temperature anomalies through time from 1880 to present. And so any blue is cooler, we're cooler than average. Any red is we're warmer than average. So the trend that we're seeing is we're getting warmer through time. We can also look at graphs from institutions like NASA, and they're showing the same thing. We have variability yearly. Sometimes we're a little bit warmer, sometimes we're a little bit cooler, but overall our trend is that we're getting warmer globally. So this is what we call global warming. So it's the overall average temperature of the Earth is increasing. And specifically, we're increasing by about 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the amount we've increased from 1901 to 2016. So that's over the entire Earth, our averages have increased that much. But when we look specifically at the US, the story is a little bit different. So this is from the 4th National Climate Assessment, which is a governmental program to put together the latest science and what's going on with climate change. And you can see in this graph, reds mean we're warmer, blues mean we're actually getting a little bit colder. This you would expect with global warming, every place would get warmer. But the thing about global warming is that it's actually giving us differences in climates across the US, across the world. So some areas, like eastern Tennessee, some areas in eastern Tennessee, eastern Kentucky, are actually getting cooler. Our area here, we're getting a little bit warmer. So we've seen about a 1 degree increase in temperature where we live. So that's climate change. And often we see global warming and climate change used interchangeably in the media. Even some experts use it just because these are buzzwords, but they are two different things. So in the contiguous US, we've seen about 1.2 degrees Fahrenheit average increase in temperature. So a little bit lower than what we're seeing globally. However, this is from 1986. Remember, our previous number was from 1901. So I focus specifically on heat waves and heat exposure at the individual level. So I wanted to talk about heat waves, how they're changing through time, and specifically what we're finding is that heat waves are becoming more frequent, they're becoming more intense, meaning that they're warmer, they're becoming longer, so instead of lasting 2 days, maybe they're lasting 3, 4, 5 days, and they're becoming more intense, which I believe I just said. So when we have more heat waves, that means we are exposed to more heat. So not only is our temperature increasing, so our everyday temperature we're experiencing is increasing, the amount of intense heat we're experiencing is increasing. the nights are also getting warmer. And this has a lot of effects on our health. So in general, our nights are getting warmer. And if we have a heat wave or just we're generally exposed to a lot of heat, we need cooler nights for our entire system of our body to cool off to avoid health effects. So if our nights are getting warmer and we're having more heat, we're not cooling off as much, which means we're more likely to have health effects. So health effects meaning small things like headaches or large things like heat exhaustion. And we're seeing this even in, I have colleagues that work with emergency room data. We're seeing increases in the amount of heat illnesses come through with increasing heat waves and increasing night temperatures. So this graph is showing you the number of warm nights, which is a minimum temperature above 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a level set by the National Weather Service. That temperature is known to produce, if you don't cool off below 75 degrees Fahrenheit, it's known to produce more health effects. So any red dot here is showing that we're having more warm nights. Any blue dots showing we're having less warm nights. Again, we're talking climate change, so different places are experiencing different things. Where we live, we're getting more warm nights. So our nights are getting warmer and they're becoming more frequent. Those warm nights are becoming more frequent. And you can see in this graph here, it's showing the same thing. The 2010s, we've had quite an uptick in the number of warm nights. So health-wise, this isn't good. Interestingly, we also are going to have more insect outbreaks because we're just not cooling off and freezing out. So insect outbreaks also bring on health effects like malaria and so forth. So I'm personally really interested in the community level. I'm an applied climatologist. I do bioclimatology, meaning I take this information and I apply it to humans or animals or vegetation that live in a small place. So I personally use my research, we work with humans. So I work in the urban area, and I work in the urban area because of a thing called the urban heat island. How many people have heard of urban heat island before? A few people, yeah. So urban heat island is an increase in temperature in urban areas versus rural areas. And this happens for a number of different reasons. Pollution holds in a lot of heat. Buildings being really close together hold in a lot of heat. We produce a lot of heat. When we turn on our air conditioner, when we drive our car, we're producing a lot of heat. It's anthropogenic heat. We also don't have a lot of vegetation. Vegetation cools an area down. Rural areas have a better system of removing the heat. So wind can flow through there, water can flow through there, you can dry it out, you can cool it off, and so forth. So urban areas are not just warmer all the time. They are, again, warmer at night. They don't cool off at night. So we're compounding these factors between we're just getting warmer at night and we're now living in an urban area, which is also warmer at night. So it just keeps compounding upon itself. So these are two images. These are from Knoxville, which is where I did my, my PhD work. So we have two neighborhoods. One is a pretty urban neighborhood for Knoxville anyway. Lots of buildings, lots of street. You can see the highway flowing through here. Lots of dark roof colors. Versus this other area, other neighborhood, lots of trees. Houses are pretty far apart. You don't have major roadways going through. You just have a residential road. And what we find, we put things like weather stations in these kinds of neighborhoods to determine who's warmer. And this is cooler. When you have trees, when you don't have everything packed in really close, you have lighter colors, this is cooler. This is much, much warmer. Unfortunately, this also corresponds to who lives in this area. So in general, this neighborhood, it's West Hills, if you're familiar with Knoxville, is a more affluent neighborhood versus Burlington, which is lower income. And that's typically what we see across a lot of cities. Our lower income folks are living in areas that have more heat. So they're more exposed to heat than higher income. This is another way to look at it. These scales are a little bit weird. This is from NASA and USGS, United States Geological Survey. In this, we're looking at temperature. So the darker the color, the cooler it is. The lighter the color, the warmer it is. And on this side, we're looking at vegetation. The darker green is more vegetation. So the connections here you can look at, here is where we have a little bit cooler. Here's where we have a little bit warmer. Does anyone know where this is in New York? Manhattan, yeah, Central Park area. Yeah, when we have a lot of vegetation, it's cooler. So we can even see this on satellites. So I mentioned that we do put weather stations around different areas. We can use little sensors and put them on different areas around an urban area to figure out how is heat changing through time. This is a newer way of monitoring the urban heat island. Because the problem is we can use airport data, we can use weather stations, but we move about our day, right? We don't stay right where a weather station would be. We don't sit on a tarmac all day being exposed to that heat. We move around throughout the day. So we need to know when we move around, how are we exposed? So this is one of the newest ways of doing this. This was a big project by National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to put sensors on cars. And this is a citizen science project. That means they gathered a lot of citizens who were interested in participating. They put these sensors on their car. So this just hooks over their window and it pulls it up far enough to where it's not picking up the car's heat and the roadway heat. And then there's a little sensor up in here. So this white part blocks out sunlight, so it's not being affected by sunlight. And it just, as you drive along, will connect and pull in any sort of atmospheric temperature that you're coming across. So typically you get 20, 30 people going. They drive the same route throughout a city several times a day. I have a colleague in Norfolk who's doing this. Norfolk's really having a hard time with flooding and heat waves and so forth. They were having 30 people go through 8 times a day. So 3 a.m. they had people driving the same route to collect all those temperatures, then again at 6 and then again at 9 and so forth. And they wanted to create maps like this. So where within this urban heat island are we actually hot? On the ground level, not just using satellite imagery, but actual data. So in this case, the darker the oranges and reds, the warmer it is. The darker the blues, the cooler it is. You can see along roadways, typically it's warmer, sorry about that. Our central city is warmer. This is Baltimore. And as you get away from the central city, you get cooler. And that's typical. Central city is usually warmer, it's got more concrete, it's got more densely packed buildings. As you go away from the city, pretty much cooler, more trees and so forth. This is also being done in a number of other cities. Miami, Atlanta's doing this. I mentioned Norfolk. This one's Richmond, Virginia. So they also did an interesting thing with thermal readings and infrared readings, where they were not just putting these sensors on the car, and this is just another version of that same sensor, just a different color. But they were also using these infrared cameras. They could tell us how warm it is on the ground at any specific time. So this specific infrared camera shows yellows as hot and purple as cool. So any area you can see all this vegetation here is cool versus the roadway, the parking lot is hot. So showing you exactly what we would think. And this is their end result. They did the car thing, drove around, gathered a lot of temperatures, citizen science, pulling in a lot of people from the community that are just interested in participating and being part of this. And Richmond's a lot more complex. So along the roads, yes, it's warm. Downtown, yes, it's warm. There's an airstrip here, an airport here, very warm. They have a green belt here. It's green, it's vegetation, it's cool. It's pretty nice. They also divided this out by census block. So I find this interesting because it's the temperature increase since about 6 to 7 a.m. through time. So what's the hottest it got throughout the day? And areas that are dark red really increase in temperatures, and areas that are more towards the light red and the tan didn't increase in temperature very much throughout the entire day. So again, these areas that are really, really densely packed, more concrete, are getting warmer throughout the day. So this is where I live. I live at the individual level. I like going out and talking to people and actually figuring out what they're experiencing. So I want to understand experience as in terms of exposure. How are individuals exposed? And you can imagine figuring this out can be a little messy, but it's really fun. So we actually put sensors on people. These are students from UT Knoxville that helped me pilot this study because we had to make sure our sensors actually work. And the sensors are these little tiny, little dime-sized sensors that hang off your neck on a lanyard. And this collects your temperature you're experiencing, just the ambient temperature around you, every 5 minutes for as long as we need it to, as long as the person is wearing it. So what we do is we go out to community meetings, we talk to people about what they're experiencing in their neighborhoods, what their concerns about heat are, about their concerns about mitigation, adaptation, those fun things. And then we ask them, can we put a sensor on you? And you can imagine the feedback you get. Some people are very excited. Yes, I want to know how I'm exposed. Some people are very worried about tracking. The good thing about these sensors is they don't track anything. They only track your temperature, your humidity, and the time of day it was collected. That's it. However, tracking is a big issue. People are still concerned. So we lose participants through that. We managed to get a good amount of participants. In this case, 40. Doesn't seem like a lot. When you're doing the work, it's a lot. We have to go out and deliver these. We have to pick them up. We have to contact people every day. Don't forget to wear your sensor because it's not something you're thinking about. So we wear these sensors during a heat wave. We also wear these sensors when it's not warm, when it's just regular temperatures. And we do that so we can compare. Are you really exposed during a heat wave and not during a not heat wave? Are you just exposed all the time? What are we actually seeing? And how does that relate to the traditional methods of collecting temperature, which is using an airport? And this is what we find. So the black line is airport data. The temperatures that were collected at the airport at the same time. The dotted line is what our individuals are experiencing. It's just averaged. So this is our heat wave, and this is over 2 days. So starting midnight throughout the day, 11:59 p.m., and then the next day going forward. And you can see that individuals were not nearly as warm during the day as what the airport experienced. This is really great news. We were warmer, our individuals were warmer at night, warmer than what the airport experienced. So what we're giving out as temperatures on our newscasts, on our weather apps, those things that we rely on, is not necessarily what we're personally experiencing. During normal conditions, same thing. Dark black line is airport. Dotted line is our individual temperatures. And we're actually warmer than airports. During a normal summer day, we're warmer than what the airport is experiencing. So the good news is that we're taking methods to reduce our heat exposure during heat waves. When we know it's hot, our residents are taking the methods they need, meaning they're going inside in air conditioning, they're not going out in the middle of the day, they're protecting themselves from being exposed. That's the great news. The not so great news is that they're more exposed at night. And remember, we said that's when we're most vulnerable. We need to cool off at night, except for we're going over that threshold of 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're also more exposed during the daytime. Or more exposed during the daytime when we have normal climate conditions. So this is showing you participants that were warmer during a heat wave, participants that were warmer during regular conditions, and the grayed out bars of participants that didn't really have a statistically significant difference in their exposure. And some of these are, I had a student participate that was just like I just play video games the whole time and I didn't leave my house. Right? And so, or like an elderly person who is just like, well, I don't really have anywhere to go, I'm going to stay home. So that's typically where that goes. Or somebody who works in an office, gets in their car, drives home, their house is cool to about the same degree. But these are the people we tend to worry about. They're very exposed to heat. In this case, they were about 13, 14 degrees warmer during normal conditions than they were during a heat wave. This is where we get a little concerned. Why? Because our temperatures are increasing. So if our temperatures are just generally increasing and we're not taking methods to reduce our exposure, this is going to become a health problem, and a pretty big one, and pretty fast. So we find that nighttime exposure is due to age. Typically, the older you are, the warmer you're keeping your house, according to our studies, and the more exposed you are. And this isn't surprising because the elderly typically have a harder time regulating their body temperature. So they feel cooler. They're not quite as aware if they are being exposed to heat. Income level is a big one. The lower your income, the more exposed to heat you are. And part of this is where you live. If you live in a very crime-ridden area, you're not going to open your windows at night. You don't want someone crawling in. You don't want someone vandalizing your stuff. So if you can't afford air conditioning, you're not comfortable opening your windows, your apartment, your house is going to get really hot very fast, especially at night. Education level is a big one. The more education you have, the less likely you are to be exposed. And part of this, we think, is because you get more social interaction with people your own age. You're talking to people about, well, it's hot, what are you doing to cool off, those kinds of things. And then location. Our inner city folks were more exposed than the folks living in the more affluent neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city. And this is just another way we wore, I don't know if you can see, she's got it pinned to her shirt. Just another way you can wear the sensor. So at the individual level, who is the most exposed to heat and why? So this is more getting into surveying and really talking to our residents. Sitting down with them saying, why are you exposed? Why do you take precautions? Why do you not take precautions? What kind of experiences with health have you had? And how do you perceive heat? So a quick note on heat health. There's a lot of applied climatologists that really focus on the emergency room data, as I mentioned. So that is, if you're going in with a stroke, a heart attack, heat stroke, heat exhaustion, the really big things, you know you're sick. I focus more on the small heat things that will affect your daily life. The migraines, the mental health issues, the dehydration, the muscle cramps, and so forth. These are not typically counted as a heat problem or heat health problem because they're not recorded. If you have a migraine and it's just because you're just hot, or if you have muscle cramps, typically you're not going to the emergency room. So these aren't very, very well counted. We also have delayed heat health concerns. So most heat-related illness problems occur after a long exposure. So not just one day, but multiple days of exposure to heat. So typically, unless you're standing out in the sun and it's really bad, you're really, really hot and dehydrated, heat stroke will take a little bit of time to come on. So I focus on the small concerns and a little bit on the delayed onset. So we're looking at what's hot. How do we even describe hot weather? We didn't really know. When we wanted to put together a survey, how do you say, on a hot day, how do we know that everybody's thinking about the same level of heat? We focus on the health effects. We focus on adaptive actions. So adaptive actions are things like using a fan, drinking water, turning on your air conditioning, wearing lighter color clothes, those things. And we focus on perceptions. How are we even thinking about heat? Do we even think heat's dangerous? What we did find is that more adaptive actions that are taken means we have less heat exposure and we have less health effects. So if we can provide those adaptive actions, provide education on how to take adaptive actions, provide resources to take adaptive actions, we're going to reduce exposure and thus keep our community healthier. So there's some quotes for you based on our research. So what we're really finding is that taking action based on exposure, taking action based on how comfortable we feel, and taking action based on warnings are the main reasons people are even taking any sort of adaptation actions. So one way to describe heat, more than 90 degrees Fahrenheit and more than 90% humidity. I'm not from the South. I'm from Wisconsin, if you can tell by my accent. That would kill me. Like, I do not do well with this. Really, like 75 with 90% humidity probably was about enough for me. I don't handle it well. But that's why we have to do this. We have to figure out, how are people even describing heat? We had some people that said anything over 75 with no humidity. We had some people say, I'm never hot. It's never hot enough. These are perceptions. But we have to think about how we communicate heat. The National Weather Service tells you it's going to be hot, it's going to be over 90 degrees. How do we know if we should be even taking precautions? That's what we're trying to find out here. Too hot to have the baby out. So it's uncomfortable. Like, those baby stroller things have the covers, and you can only imagine how hot it gets in there. You want to be exposed to sunlight. Uncomfortable in pants. I agree. Like, it's not comfortable, right? It's hot. It's uncomfortable. So that level of comfort, we had a number of people talk about they go out and run, they like to hike, they can't do that if it's too hot. And then if the meteorologist tells me to be careful. This did not come up that often. We want it to come up more. We want people to pay attention to watches and warnings. And that's actually what we're continuing to work on is, do we even understand what a watch and a warning is? What's a heat advisory? Do we even know what the consequences of those things are? That's future research that we're just starting now here in Murfreesboro. So our participants focus on health concerns as one of the main reasons that they think heat is dangerous. And one thing that came out that was really interesting is having previous heat health issues. In this case, we're looking at heart problems, trouble breathing, kidney issues, heat stroke, so forth. If you've had something like that previously, you're more likely to say heat health is really important, it's really a danger. So I have heart problems, I have trouble breathing when it's hot. This is not an uncommon response. It's easy to get dehydrated. I get migraines from the heat occasionally. Our concern is that we're not connecting migraines to heat. If you're just having a stressful day and you go home and you're like, man, I've got a headache, are you even connecting that to, man, it was really hot out and I was really hot all day long and sweating and just not feeling great? Are we even connecting these two ideas? And then I find that my mental health is affected by having to find shelter from heat. Mental health comes up quite a bit, and we're looking into that more as well. We're actually going to be looking into students and mental health with heat in the upcoming couple of months here. Social support is necessary. We call this social cohesion. How much social support do you have around you? These three words, I live alone, came up probably more than any other response in our entire survey and all the research I've ever done. I live alone. I don't have somebody to help me out. If my air conditioning goes, I'm done. I'm just going to be really hot. If you don't have friends to call on, if you don't have family nearby, if you don't have neighbors that you can count on, this ends up becoming a big problem. Checking on your neighbors, checking on the elderly, checking on children, those that are more prone to health effects is really important to reducing health problems. And then apathy is a concern. So those that just tough it out and they're like, no, it's fine. I'm used to heat. It would disturb my routine. They don't want to change up what they're doing on a daily basis. Some activities can't be avoided. So this always came out as, I have to walk to work. It's my mode of transportation. I have to work outside. That's my job. My kids have to go outside. They're driving me crazy. It was another one. Heat is dangerous to everybody, meaning everybody's exposed, so we shouldn't do anything about it. And then I just don't go outside. So there are some people that just prefer to stay inside. So apathy becomes a concern because they're still being exposed. Maybe not the I don't go outside person, unless his or her air conditioning breaks. But this becomes a problem because we're not taking action. We don't take action if we don't really care. So heat waves are becoming more frequent, they're becoming more exposed, our nights are getting warmer. The question is, how do we adapt? We can also talk on the flip side of mitigation, so how do we even prevent heat waves from becoming more frequent and intense and so forth. But I really live in the adaptation world. How do we, right now, reduce our exposure to heat? If it was 100 degrees outside right now, what can we do right now to prevent health effects? So a few things. We need to increase adaptation methods and access in our communities for individuals. And this goes hand in hand with education, going into community meetings, really talking to people about, here's what you can do in the short term to avoid that heat exposure. Changing perception of heat danger. So just because we live in the South and we're used to it being hot, doesn't mean that we can't actually do something about reducing our exposure and being hot. Altering the way we communicate methods. So there's a lot of research going into personal apps on your phone. So we figure out how exposed are you based on not only where you are in the current weather, but your personal characteristics, what you typically wear, your height, your weight, your personal perception of heat, everything goes into a personal app, and then it can tell you you're in danger of being overexposed. And then we need to increase social cohesion, increase our social support. We find that areas that have more communicative and more supportive neighborhoods that have things like sidewalks. I can easily get to my neighbor's house. We have community meetings. All these things come together and produce a support system for folks. And then they notice if neighbor Joe hasn't been seen in a week, maybe we should go check on him, see if he's okay. So that's all I have for you. And I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Yes.
So I work outside, and I've actually experienced heat exhaustion. So how do we combat employers who pretty much tell us to get over it?
So that is there's laws.
I mean, we do certain
Right.
things for that, but like past a certain point, because like we have the Gatorades, the waters, the fans, but after a certain point, when it's increasing every year, and you start to feel those effects, especially if you work out every day, you can tell that it's getting hotter. And so past those laws and those specific things, they're like, oh, well, yeah, you just have to deal with this. Like, how should we approach our employers with our concerns about the exposure?
So that's a really great question. So I would really approach it from a health perspective. Like, if you want me to be healthy and continue to work tomorrow and the day after, I have to have breaks. And that's been really shown. There's occupational studies using these sensors as well that show that if you just go sit in a car with the engine running and the air conditioning on, you're going to cool off much faster. So every hour you sit in there for 5 minutes or something, whatever you need. Shades, a big one that can help. I'm trying to think of like cheaper ways of doing this. Fans are not good. Fans are actually one of the worst things you can do when it's hot because it's blowing on you, it's evaporating all your sweat, and it's dehydrating you. So it's actually making things worse. But breaks have been shown to be the biggest thing to reduce your exposure and your delayed health and all that kind of problem.
Do you think in our current political scene that this is even an issue that's on the map?
For like federal laws and so forth with heat waves?
Yeah, I guess that would be where it was most relevant.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not at all. It should be. This is a major community concern. But that's why I personally deal with more of the adaptation side of things than the mitigation side. The mitigation side is going to need more of the federal laws, the state laws to reduce the causes of increasing heat. But we can work at a much smaller level to reduce personal exposure. So that's what we're more focused on. I'll come right back to you.
You showed a map that there were some darker maroon sections, and then there was some maybe lighter red, and then there was tan, showing the difference between 6 and 7 a.m. and then in the afternoon. And the difference between the lightest one, I think it was maybe like 13.8 degrees, and the top one was only 2 degrees higher than that. Mm-hmm. So it didn't seem to be a huge gap in between there, maybe a 2 degree difference. But is that difference simply due to lack of vegetation in that area? Or can there be a direct causation drawn between more human activity in these areas and then less human activity in these areas? For example, in a place where there's less human activity, less vegetation here, more vegetation here, is there going to be the same about 2-degree difference in that area?
So it can be multiple things. So it can be lack of vegetation or more vegetation, but it can also be there's just not a lot of humans there producing heat. You know, we're not running buses, we're not running air conditioners and so forth. If all were equal across that space, it would be the same temperature for sure. There's something causing a warmer location in that area. But there's so many variables that unless we're on the ground, we don't necessarily know what they are. Okay.
Yeah. With the push in particularly urbanization dealing with more compacted residential shopping type of areas, it seems like this would be a contraindication for that type of an arrangement, because you're going to have everything on top of each other. You're probably going to have, for the ones that I've seen anyway, no trees, except for what they put back, so forget the shade, it's just non-existent. The roofs are dark, and there's no airway. The only thing that's the saving grace is that it might be concrete as opposed to blacktop.
Yeah.
So this just seems like, I mean, it would indicate to me that this kind of information would want to be passed on and say, hey, think about what you're doing.
Yeah, and there's definitely really movements towards what we call eco-districts. So these are using more sustainable methods. So you have more green space, and it's a smaller, more of a district or a neighborhood that you live within, you work within, all your amenities are there, your education is there, your job is there, and so forth. So not just the way that it's structured, the way how far apart buildings are, but you have more community spaces which are green, you have more waterways, you have more of that kind of stuff. And then there's other ways to get around this. So just having blacktop versus concrete, there's also what we call high reflectivity concrete. So it's painted white, or it's a really, really light color, which reflects a lot of our energy back out. There's also what we call permeable pavers, and we do have those on campus here in front of Forest Hall. So those have, it's not just solid concrete, there's breaks between them with more natural materials that allow water to penetrate through. So rather than just water washing off, taking all the stuff on the concrete with it, it's actually penetrating and causing a little bit more cooling. So I agree, like this is a really big case for the current way we're doing urbanization is not working efficiently.
Yes.
Air conditioning seems to be a tough issue, because I know one of the recommendations to keep people cooler is to put them inside and have the air conditioning on. But it seemed like air conditioning also increases external temperature when it's on, which creates a higher external temperature, which means your air conditioning has to be turned on more, which is a vicious circle, it seems like. Is there any ability to make that better or an alternative to that?
There is. So there's what's called passive houses. So passive houses have, they use the sun's energy to keep the house at a certain temperature the entire year round. It uses about 10% of the electricity that a conventional house or apartment would. So we have that, and it has to do with ventilation, it has to do with the way that the energy is actually processed. Then we also have breathable building materials that sit on the side of buildings that when it's heated, they actually lift up and allow heat to escape. And then when it's warm, or when it's cold at night, it comes back down. These are metals. They come back down and they keep the heat in. So we have those. We also have things like green roofs, which can keep it a little bit cooler. So, but it is a vicious circle. And we, from a humanistic perspective, we want to focus on health. But from an environmental perspective, we want to focus on reducing anthropogenic heat and emissions. Yeah.
Yes.
Can you give some good examples of increasing heat adaptation methods for the individual and the community? Like, what would be some good examples of that? Like, would that be just normalizing umbrellas during a hot summer day, just holding an umbrella?
Yeah. So ways to adapt for an individual, you're saying?
Yeah, or in the community in general as well.
Yeah. So community education programs to do this is really important, and providing the resources for people that don't have the income or the means to grab those adaptation methods are really important. So umbrellas are a good one. You create your own shade. But also we can have community programs that plant trees, which is pretty common in this day and age. I've heard a lot about this in the last couple of months where a lot of bigger cities are now planting more trees. So planting trees where there are none is one way. But even just educating on the basics. So don't wear black outside. It absorbs heat. It keeps you warmer. Always have water with you. Don't use the fans. Make sure you're in an air-conditioned building if you can. There are cooling centers community-wide in a lot of different cities. So making sure people have access to cooling centers is a big one. So not just they're there and they're open, but people can actually get there via public transportation or walk to those locations is important as well. Okay.
So in urban, low-income types of areas, this is pulling it back to my earlier question, this is something that's going to have to be highly federally funded to disperse the heat in urban areas, right? Because there's a lot of people that they don't have the education on heat or the resources.
So, sorry to interrupt you, were you? Yeah, I get what you're saying. So I don't see it as a federal project. I see it as more something that like we as academics, students, professors, and so forth can go out and do in our communities. And so this is what I do, and so, I see it more as a citywide initiative rather than, or even a statewide initiative rather than being a federal initiative. But money often comes from federal sources. So if I had to get a grant, it's likely going to be a federal grant. Yes?
So I noticed a lot of the studies were done here in America, but what about other places that might have a much more severe problem? Maybe like around the equator, like maybe in like Oman or Saudi Arabia. There's vegetation there, but there's a lot less than there is over here, for example. So like, how does it affect them? And also, I don't know if this is a myth or not, but when I was younger, I always heard that like in like desert type areas, like it's really warm during the day, but it's really cold at night. How is that like affecting their climate? Has it changed, or do you know anything about that? If not.
Yeah, so deserts, you're right on. Deserts are very warm in the daytime and cool at night. They fluctuate very, very much throughout the day. And so they are actually in a little bit better of a position because even if they warm a little bit at night, it's okay because they're still cooling off enough that they're able to get that relief. So I just read a study from Ghana actually about this kind of work using sensors on people who worked in mining and how exposed they were in a tropical region. And it was a little disheartening to read it because they didn't have the protections that we would have here for our employers and so forth. So it's definitely a big concern in other places as well because they are warming pretty quickly. And I'm sorry, what was the other part of your question?
No, I can cover it pretty
Okay.
well. Yeah. I mean, like, so it sounds like the nighttime exposure in other areas might be even better than here, is what you're kind of saying as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're really humid here, so we don't cool off that much in the summer at night anyway. We'll have nights that are like 75 or 80 outside. That's much too hot for our bodies to handle. And then if we're going to continue getting warmer, it's going to be a problem. Yeah.
Can you explain why a desert with no aerial vegetation gets so cool at night and a place that does maybe have some more vegetation does not?
It has to do with how much humidity you have. So deserts are much less humid. Humidity holds on to heat really well. So if you have less humidity, that is just going to cool off a lot faster. Without going into thermodynamics or anything, which I'm sure is not what you're, But it can heat really fast during the day. Land heats really, really fast. So it can warm up really fast during the day.
Yes.
What's the significance of us being warmer in the nighttime? Like the clinical, I guess I don't understand why that's worse.
So the problem is it's compounding what we're exposed to during the daytime. So during the daytime, we're warm, we're sweating, we're dehydrated, we're cramping, whatever the case may be. At night, we need to actually cool our entire physiological body down to then kind of negate those effects from happening again the next day. So if we don't fully cool down, the effects that we would just have on a normal day will just get greater and greater through time. And that's where those delayed onset problems start happening. I mean, that's a start, yeah. You need to make sure your house is below at least 75 degrees. And we found a lot of people were keeping their house more about 80 because it costs so much to run their electricity or run their air conditioning.
Any more questions? Well, please join me in thanking our speakers.